Hello everyone, ready to improve your English fluency? If you want to improve your English fluency in a natural, practical way, this video is for you. In this video, you'll hear 425 long, natural English sentences carefully organised across 17 everyday topics. You can listen, repeat, or simply absorb the rhythm and flow as you go. The more you expose yourself to this kind of English, the easier speaking will become. Let's get started. I usually wake up a little earlier than planned, so I can start the day calmly without rushing. I usually wake up a little earlier than planned, so I can start the day calmly without rushing. After getting out of bed, I take a few minutes to stretch and mentally prepare myself for the day ahead. After getting out of bed, I take a few minutes to stretch and mentally prepare myself for the day ahead. I make a simple breakfast while checking the time to make sure I am not running late. I make a simple breakfast while checking the time to make sure I am not running late. Once I finish eating, I clean up the kitchen straight away so it does not feel messy later. Once I finish eating, I clean up the kitchen straight away so it does not feel messy later. I get dressed based on the weather forecast because I do not like being uncomfortable during the day. I get dressed based on the weather forecast because I do not like being uncomfortable during the day. Before leaving the house, I double check that I have my keys, phone, and wallet with me. Before leaving the house, I double check that I have my keys, phone, and wallet with me. During my commute, I often listen to music or a podcast to make the journey feel shorter. During my commute, I often listen to music or a podcast to make the journey feel shorter. When I arrive at work, I like to organise my tasks so I know exactly what needs doing. When I arrive at work, I like to organise my tasks so I know exactly what needs doing. I try to focus on one task at a time instead of constantly switching between different things. I try to focus on one task at a time instead of constantly switching between different things. Around midday, I usually take a short break to eat lunch and rest my eyes for a while. Around midday, I usually take a short break to eat lunch and rest my eyes for a while. After lunch, it sometimes takes effort to regain concentration and stay productive. After lunch, it sometimes takes effort to regain concentration and stay productive. I check my messages during the afternoon to respond to anything urgent or time sensitive. I check my messages during the afternoon to respond to anything urgent or time sensitive. As the day goes on, I try to finish important tasks before my energy levels drop. As the day goes on, I try to finish important tasks before my energy levels drop. Once work is done, I like to disconnect properly rather than continue thinking about it. Once work is done, I like to disconnect properly rather than continue thinking about it. On the way home, I sometimes stop at the shop to pick up a few things for the evening. On the way home, I sometimes stop at the shop to pick up a few things for the evening. When I get home, I change into comfortable clothes to help my body relax. When I get home, I change into comfortable clothes to help my body relax. I usually prepare dinner at home because it feels healthier and more satisfying. I usually prepare dinner at home because it feels healthier and more satisfying. While eating, I try not to rush so I can actually enjoy the meal. While eating, I try not to rush so I can actually enjoy the meal. In the evening, I often spend time watching something or talking with family members. In the evening, I often spend time watching something or talking with family members. I make a habit of checking my schedule for the next day so I feel organized. I make a habit of checking my schedule for the next day so I feel organized. Before going to bed, I tidy up slightly to make the morning easier. Before going to bed, I tidy up slightly to make the morning easier. I avoid using my phone too much at night because it affects my sleep. I avoid using my phone too much at night because it affects my sleep. I usually go to bed at a similar time on weekdays to keep a steady routine. I usually go to bed at a similar time on weekdays to keep a steady routine. Lying in bed, I sometimes reflect on what went well during the day. Lying in bed, I sometimes reflect on what went well during the day. Once I fall asleep, I hope the next day will feel productive but not overwhelming. Once I fall asleep, I hope the next day will feel productive but not overwhelming. When my phone rings unexpectedly, I sometimes hesitate for a moment before answering. When my phone rings unexpectedly, I sometimes hesitate for a moment before answering. I usually answer the phone politely, even if I am not sure who is calling. I usually answer the phone politely, even if I am not sure who is calling. If the signal is poor, I move to a quieter place so I can hear more clearly. If the signal is poor, I move to a quieter place so I can hear more clearly. I often ask the caller to repeat themselves when the connection cuts in and out. I often ask the caller to repeat themselves when the connection cuts in and out. During important calls, I like to take notes so I do not forget the key details later. During important calls, I like to take notes so I do not forget key details later. If I miss a call, I usually check the voicemail as soon as I have time. If I miss a call, I usually check the voicemail as soon as I have time. I try to speak clearly on the phone because facial expressions do not help. I try to speak clearly on the phone because facial expressions do not help. When the conversation becomes long, I sometimes check the time without realizing. When the conversation becomes long, I sometimes check the time without realizing. I find it easier to explain complex things slowly rather than rushing through them. I find it easier to explain complex things slowly rather than rushing through them. If I need to end the call politely, I usually give a clear but friendly reason. If I need to end the call politely, I usually give a clear but friendly reason. I feel slightly uncomfortable making phone calls in busy or noisy public places. I feel slightly uncomfortable making phone calls in busy or noisy public places. When calling a company, I often have to wait patiently before speaking to someone. When calling a company, I often have to wait patiently before speaking to someone. I try to stay calm on the phone, even if the situation is frustrating. I try to stay calm on the phone, even if the situation is frustrating. If the call drops suddenly, I usually wait to see who calls back first. If the call drops suddenly, I usually wait to see who calls back first. I sometimes put the call on speaker when I need my hands free. I sometimes put the call on speaker when I need my hands free. When arranging something by phone, I always confirm the details before hanging up. When arranging something by phone, I always confirm the details before hanging up. I appreciate it when the other person speaks slowly and clearly on the phone. I appreciate it when the other person speaks slowly and clearly on the phone. If I do not understand something, I ask questions instead of pretending I do. If I do not understand something, I ask questions instead of pretending I do. I usually lower my voice slightly when speaking on the phone in public. I usually lower my voice slightly when speaking on the phone in public. During personal calls, I prefer finding a private space where I can talk freely. During personal calls, I prefer finding a private space where I can talk freely. I often end calls by summarizing what we agreed to avoid confusion later. I often end calls by summarizing what we agreed to avoid confusion later. When calling someone back, I usually mention the missed call straight away. When calling someone back, I usually mention the missed call straight away. I sometimes feel relieved when a complicated issue is resolved over the phone. I sometimes feel relieved when a complicated issue is resolved over the phone. If the call is unexpected, it can take a moment to organize my thoughts. If the call is unexpected, it can take a moment to organize my thoughts. After finishing a phone call, I often reflect on whether I explained myself clearly. After finishing a phone call, I often reflect on whether I explained myself clearly. When making plans with friends, I usually suggest a few options instead of deciding everything myself. When making plans with friends, I usually suggest a few options instead of deciding everything myself. I prefer setting a clear time and place so there is no confusion later. I prefer setting a clear time and place so there is no confusion later. If someone sounds unsure, I give them space to think rather than pushing for an answer. If someone sounds unsure, I give them space to think rather than pushing for an answer. I often check my calendar twice before agreeing to anything important. I often check my calendar twice before agreeing to anything important. When plans change suddenly, I try to stay flexible and not get annoyed. When plans change suddenly, I try to stay flexible and not get annoyed. I like confirming plans on the day to make sure everyone is still available. I like confirming plans on the day to make sure everyone is still available. If something feels rushed, I suggest postponing it to another day. If something feels rushed, I suggest postponing it to another day. I usually think about travel time before committing to meeting somewhere far away. I usually think about travel time before committing to meeting somewhere far away. When planning ahead, I try not to fill every free moment with activities. When planning ahead, I try not to fill every free moment with activities. I sometimes delay making plans because I want to see how my week develops. I sometimes delay making plans because I want to see how my week develops. If plans involve other people, I consider their schedules as well as my own. If plans involve other people, I consider their schedules as well as my own. I find it helpful to write things down so I do not forget important arrangements. I find it helpful to write things down so I do not forget important arrangements. When organizing something social, I like to keep the atmosphere relaxed. When organizing something social, I like to keep the atmosphere relaxed. I avoid making promises too early in case my situation changes unexpectedly. I avoid making promises too early in case my situation changes unexpectedly. If I cannot commit straight away, I usually explain my reasons honestly. If I cannot commit straight away, I usually explain my reasons honestly. I feel more comfortable agreeing to plans when I know what to expect. I feel more comfortable agreeing to plans when I know what to expect. When discussing future plans, I try to be realistic rather than overly optimistic. When discussing future plans, I try to be realistic rather than overly optimistic. I often suggest a backup option in case the original plan falls through. I often suggest a backup option in case the original plan falls through. If someone cancels politely, I usually understand and stay positive about it. If someone cancels politely, I usually understand and stay positive about it. I prefer planning things in advance rather than deciding everything at the last minute. I prefer planning things in advance rather than deciding everything at the last minute. When plans involve money, I like to be clear about costs from the start. When plans involve money, I like to be clear about costs from the start. I sometimes leave space in my schedule just in case something unexpected comes up. I sometimes leave space in my schedule just in case something unexpected comes up. If plans start to feel stressful, I remind myself they are meant to be enjoyable. If plans start to feel stressful, I remind myself they are meant to be enjoyable. I usually check the weather forecast before making outdoor arrangements. I usually check the weather forecast before making outdoor arrangements. Once plans are confirmed, I feel more relaxed knowing what the day will involve. Once plans are confirmed, I feel more relaxed knowing what the day will involve. In my view, expressing an honest opinion helps conversations feel more meaningful and balanced. In my view, expressing an honest opinion helps conversations feel more meaningful and balanced. From my experience, people respond better when opinions are shared calmly rather than forcefully. From my experience, people respond better when opinions are shared calmly rather than forcefully. I tend to think that listening carefully matters just as much as sharing your own thoughts. I tend to think that listening carefully matters just as much as sharing your own thoughts. Personally, I find it easier to explain my opinion after hearing different perspectives first. Personally, I find it easier to explain my opinion after hearing different perspectives first. At times, sharing an opinion requires confidence, especially in unfamiliar social situations. At times, sharing an opinion requires confidence, especially in unfamiliar social situations. It seems to me that opinions sound more convincing when supported by clear reasons. It seems to me that opinions sound more convincing when supported by clear reasons. I usually feel comfortable giving my opinion as long as the discussion remains respectful. I usually feel comfortable giving my opinion as long as the discussion remains respectful. In many situations, stating an opinion politely can prevent unnecessary misunderstandings. In many situations, stating an opinion politely can prevent unnecessary misunderstandings. I believe conversations improve when people feel safe disagreeing without judgment. I believe conversations improve when people feel safe disagreeing without judgment. Rather than staying silent, I prefer to explain how I see things in a balanced way. Rather than staying silent, I prefer to explain how I see things in a balanced way. Sharing opinions openly can help others understand your values and priorities better. Sharing opinions openly can help others understand your values and priorities better. I sometimes soften my opinion slightly to avoid sounding too direct or harsh. I sometimes soften my opinion slightly to avoid sounding too direct or harsh. In group discussions, expressing a clear opinion helps move conversations forward. In group discussions, expressing a clear opinion helps move conversations forward. I find that tone of voice plays a big role in how an opinion is received. I find that tone of voice plays a big role in how an opinion is received. Even strong opinions can sound reasonable if they are explained thoughtfully. Even strong opinions can sound reasonable if they are explained thoughtfully. I try to separate facts from personal opinions to avoid confusion. I try to separate facts from personal opinions to avoid confusion. Offering an opinion does not always mean expecting others to agree with it. Offering an opinion does not always mean expecting others to agree with it. I feel more confident sharing opinions once I have thought them through properly. I feel more confident sharing opinions once I have thought them through properly. In everyday conversations, opinions often reflect personal experiences rather than facts. In everyday conversations, opinions often reflect personal experiences rather than facts. I prefer discussing opinions with people who are open to different viewpoints. I prefer discussing opinions with people who are open to different viewpoints. Sometimes holding back an opinion is wiser than sharing it immediately. Sometimes holding back an opinion is wiser than sharing it immediately. I notice that people engage more when opinions are explained clearly and calmly. I notice that people engage more when opinions are explained clearly and calmly. Expressing an opinion respectfully can strengthen trust in a conversation. Expressing an opinion respectfully can strengthen trust in a conversation. I often phrase opinions carefully to keep discussions friendly and productive. I often phrase opinions carefully to keep discussions friendly and productive. Sharing opinions thoughtfully helps create more open and honest communication overall. Sharing opinions thoughtfully helps create more open and honest communication overall. Explaining the situation clearly helps others understand what went wrong without unnecessary confusion. Explaining the situation clearly helps others understand what went wrong without unnecessary confusion. Describing the issue step by step makes it easier to identify where the real problem started. Describing the issue step by step makes it easier to identify where the real problem started. Pointing out the main difficulty early can save time and prevent misunderstandings later. Pointing out the main difficulty early can save time and prevent misunderstandings later. Admitting there is a problem often feels uncomfortable, but it is usually the first step towards fixing it. Admitting there is a problem often feels uncomfortable, but it is usually the first step towards fixing it. Clarifying what you expected versus what actually happened can highlight the cause of the issue. Clarifying what you expected versus what actually happened can highlight the cause of the issue. Mentioning specific details helps others see why the problem matters and needs attention. Mentioning specific details helps others see why the problem matters and needs attention. Outlining the problem calmly can stop the situation from becoming more stressful than necessary. Outlining the problem calmly can stop the situation from becoming more stressful than necessary. Highlighting the most urgent part of the issue helps people prioritize what to deal with first. Highlighting the most urgent part of the issue helps people prioritize what to deal with first. Acknowledging mistakes openly can make explanations sound more honest and believable. Acknowledging mistakes openly can make explanations sound more honest and believable. Identifying the root cause is often more helpful than focusing only on the results. Identifying the root cause is often more helpful than focusing only on the results. Breaking down the problem into smaller parts can make it feel more manageable. Breaking down the problem into smaller parts can make it feel more manageable. Noticing patterns in repeated issues can explain why the same problem keeps returning. Noticing patterns in repeated issues can explain why the same problem keeps returning. Comparing what should have happened with what actually happened often reveals the gap. Comparing what should have happened with what actually happened often reveals the gap. Raising concerns early can prevent minor issues from becoming major problems later. Raising concerns early can prevent minor issues from becoming major problems later. Accepting responsibility where appropriate can help resolve the situation more smoothly. Accepting responsibility where appropriate can help resolve the situation more smoothly. Exploring possible reasons allows others to see that the problem was not ignored. Exploring possible reasons allows others to see that the problem was not ignored. Stating the facts clearly helps keep the explanation objective rather than emotional. Stating the facts clearly helps keep the explanation objective rather than emotional. Emphasizing how the problem affects others can make your explanation more persuasive. Emphasizing how the problem affects others can make your explanation more persuasive. Addressing the issue directly often leads to quicker and more practical solutions. Addressing the issue directly often leads to quicker and more practical solutions. Recognizing limitations can explain why the problem could not be avoided completely. Recognizing limitations can explain why the problem could not be avoided completely. Summarizing the situation at the end helps confirm that everyone understands the issue. Summarizing the situation at the end helps confirm that everyone understands the issue. Distinguishing between assumptions and facts can prevent further confusion. Distinguishing between assumptions and facts can prevent further confusion. Explaining possible outcomes prepares others for what might happen next. Explaining possible outcomes prepares others for what might happen next. Requesting feedback shows that you are open to improving the situation. Requesting feedback shows that you are open to improving the situation. Concluding the explanation with a solution-focused tone helps move the conversation forward. Concluding the explanation with a solution-focused tone helps move the conversation forward. I was wondering if you could help me understand this situation a bit more clearly. I was wondering if you could help me understand this situation a bit more clearly. Would you mind giving me a hand with this, because I am not completely sure what to do next? Would you mind giving me a hand with this, because I am not completely sure what to do next? If you have a moment, I could really use some advice on how to handle this properly. If you have a moment, I could really use some advice on how to handle this properly. I am struggling slightly with this task and would appreciate any guidance you can offer. I am struggling slightly with this task and would appreciate any guidance you can offer. Could you possibly explain this again, as I want to make sure I have understood it correctly? Could you possibly explain this again, as I want to make sure I have understood it correctly? I might need a bit of help here, especially since this is my first time dealing with it. I might need a bit of help here, especially since this is my first time dealing with it. If it is not too much trouble, I would like to ask for your opinion on this matter. If it is not too much trouble, I would like to ask for your opinion on this matter. I am not confident about my approach, so some feedback would be extremely helpful. I am not confident about my approach, so some feedback would be extremely helpful. Would it be okay if I asked you to take a quick look at this for me? Would it be okay if I asked you to take a quick look at this for me? I feel a little stuck at the moment and could really benefit from your experience. I feel a little stuck at the moment and could really benefit from your experience. If you know a better way to do this, I would be grateful to hear it. If you know a better way to do this, I would be grateful to hear it. I hate to ask, but I could use some support getting this finished on time. I hate to ask, but I could use some support getting this finished on time. Could you point me in the right direction, as I seem to be missing something important? Could you point me in the right direction, as I seem to be missing something important. I am finding this more difficult than expected and could use a second opinion. I am finding this more difficult than expected and could use a second opinion. If you are familiar with this process, your advice would mean a lot to me. If you are familiar with this process, your advice would mean a lot to me. I am unsure whether I am doing this correctly and would appreciate your confirmation. I am unsure whether I am doing this correctly and would appreciate your confirmation. Would you be able to spare a few minutes to help me work through this issue? Would you be able to spare a few minutes to help me work through this issue? I do not want to make a mistake, so I thought it would be best to ask first. I do not want to make a mistake, so I thought it would be best to ask first. If you have dealt with something similar before, your insight could be very useful. If you have dealt with something similar before, your insight could be very useful. I feel comfortable asking you because you usually explain things very clearly. I feel comfortable asking you because you usually explain things very clearly. Could I run this idea past you to see if it makes sense? Could I run this idea past you to see if it makes sense? I am asking for help now because I would rather fix this early than later. I am asking for help now because I would rather fix this early than later. If there is anything I should avoid doing, I would really like to know. If there is anything I should avoid doing, I would really like to know. I appreciate your time, especially if you are able to help me sort this out. I appreciate your time, especially if you are able to help me sort this out. Asking for help feels easier when I know the other person is willing to listen. Asking for help feels easier when I know the other person is willing to listen. Deciding what to do next often depends on how much information is available at the time. Deciding what to do next often depends on how much information is available at the time. I usually take a moment to think things through before committing to an important decision. I usually take a moment to think things through before committing to an important decision. Faced with several options, I try to compare the possible outcomes rather than rushing. Faced with several options, I try to compare the possible outcomes rather than rushing. Sometimes a decision feels easier once I clearly understand what I want to avoid. Sometimes a decision feels easier once I clearly understand what I want to avoid. Making a choice becomes harder when emotions start influencing logical thinking. Making a choice becomes harder when emotions start influencing logical thinking. I prefer weighing the advantages and disadvantages before settling on a final decision. I prefer weighing the advantages and disadvantages before settling on a final decision. In uncertain situations, trusting my instincts can feel just as important as analysing facts. In uncertain situations, trusting my instincts can feel just as important as analysing facts. Reaching a decision often requires accepting that no option is completely perfect. Reaching a decision often requires accepting that no option is completely perfect. I find it helpful to imagine the long-term impact before choosing a particular path. I find it helpful to imagine the long-term impact before choosing a particular path. Pressure from others can make decision-making feel more stressful than it needs to be. Pressure from others can make decision-making feel more stressful than it needs to be. Taking responsibility for a decision helps me feel more confident about the outcome. Taking responsibility for a decision helps me feel more confident about the outcome. At times, delaying a decision allows me to gain clarity and perspective. At times, delaying a decision allows me to gain clarity and perspective. Choosing between familiar and unfamiliar options often tests my comfort zone. Choosing between familiar and unfamiliar options often tests my comfort zone. I tend to feel more satisfied with decisions that align with my values. I tend to feel more satisfied with decisions that align with my values. Making decisions quickly can be useful, but it sometimes increases the risk of mistakes. Making decisions quickly can be useful, but it sometimes increases the risk of mistakes. I often ask myself whether a decision will simplify or complicate my life. I often ask myself whether a decision will simplify or complicate my life. In complex situations, breaking the decision into smaller parts makes it easier to manage. In complex situations, breaking the decision into smaller parts makes it easier to manage. Regret usually comes from acting without thinking rather than taking time to decide. Regret usually comes from acting without thinking rather than taking time to decide. I feel more confident once a decision is made and I stop overthinking it. I feel more confident once a decision is made and I stop overthinking it. Advice from others can be helpful, but the final decision still feels personal. Advice from others can be helpful, but the final decision still feels personal. Choosing not to act is sometimes a decision in itself. Choosing not to act is sometimes a decision in itself. I try to accept that mistakes are part of the decision-making process. I try to accept that mistakes are part of the decision-making process. Making thoughtful decisions helps build trust in my own judgment over time. Making thoughtful decisions helps build trust in my own judgment over time. Doubt can appear even after a decision feels logically sound. Doubt can appear even after a decision feels logically sound. Looking back, I often realize that difficult decisions helped me grow the most. Looking back, I often realize that difficult decisions helped me grow the most. Taking responsibility for my tasks helps build trust with the people I work with every day. Taking responsibility for my tasks helps build trust with the people I work with every day. At work, managing expectations carefully often prevents unnecessary pressure later on. At work, managing expectations carefully often prevents unnecessary pressure later on. Being clear about my role makes it easier to prioritize what truly needs attention. Being clear about my role makes it easier to prioritize what truly needs attention. I try to complete important responsibilities early rather than leaving them until the last minute. I try to complete important responsibilities early rather than leaving them until the last minute. Balancing multiple duties requires focus, especially when deadlines overlap. Balancing multiple duties requires focus, especially when deadlines overlap. Showing reliability at work often matters just as much as technical skill. Showing reliability at work often matters just as much as technical skill. I feel more confident when I understand exactly what is expected of me. I feel more confident when I understand exactly what is expected of me. Handling responsibilities properly usually means communicating clearly with others involved. Handling responsibilities properly usually means communicating clearly with others involved. In busy periods, staying organized becomes essential to avoid mistakes. In busy periods, staying organized becomes essential to avoid mistakes. Accepting feedback helps me improve how I manage my responsibilities. Accepting feedback helps me improve how I manage my responsibilities. I often break large tasks into smaller steps to keep my workload manageable. I often break large tasks into smaller steps to keep my workload manageable. Being accountable for my actions makes problem solving more straightforward. Being accountable for my actions makes problem solving more straightforward. Work feels less stressful when responsibilities are shared fairly among the team. Work feels less stressful when responsibilities are shared fairly among the team. Meeting deadlines consistently helps create a sense of professional reliability. Meeting deadlines consistently helps create a sense of professional reliability. I take pride in completing my duties thoroughly rather than rushing through them. I take pride in completing my duties thoroughly rather than rushing through them. When responsibilities change, adapting quickly becomes part of the job. When responsibilities change, adapting quickly becomes part of the job. Managing time effectively allows me to handle responsibilities without feeling overwhelmed. Managing time effectively allows me to handle responsibilities without feeling overwhelmed. Clear communication reduces confusion about who is responsible for what. Clear communication reduces confusion about who is responsible for what. I feel more motivated when my responsibilities have a clear purpose. I feel more motivated when my responsibilities have a clear purpose. Fulfilling work duties properly often requires discipline, even on difficult days. Fulfilling work duties properly often requires discipline, even on difficult days. Recognizing limits helps prevent taking on more responsibility than I can manage. Recognizing limits helps prevent taking on more responsibility than I can manage. Staying focused on priorities helps me avoid distractions during working hours. Staying focused on priorities helps me avoid distractions during working hours. Responsibility at work includes owning mistakes and learning from them. Responsibility at work includes owning mistakes and learning from them. Completing tasks to a high standard builds confidence in my abilities. Completing tasks to a high standard builds confidence in my abilities. Over time, handling responsibilities well creates opportunities for growth and trust. Over time, handling responsibilities well creates opportunities for growth and trust. Managing money carefully helps reduce stress and creates a stronger sense of financial security. Managing money carefully helps reduce stress and creates a stronger sense of financial security. I try to track my spending regularly so small purchases do not quietly add up. I try to track my spending regularly so small purchases do not quietly add up. Spending decisions often feel easier when I clearly understand my monthly budget. Spending decisions often feel easier when I clearly understand my monthly budget. I prefer saving a portion of my income rather than spending everything immediately. I prefer saving a portion of my income rather than spending everything immediately. Unexpected expenses can quickly disrupt even the most carefully planned finances. Unexpected expenses can quickly disrupt even the most carefully planned finances. I usually think twice before making large purchases that are not truly necessary. I usually think twice before making large purchases that are not truly necessary. Setting financial goals makes saving money feel more purposeful and rewarding. Setting financial goals makes saving money feel more purposeful and rewarding. I feel more in control when I separate essential expenses from optional spending. I feel more in control when I separate essential expenses from optional spending. Paying attention to prices helps me make smarter choices without feeling restricted. Paying attention to prices helps me make smarter choices without feeling restricted. I try to avoid impulse buying by giving myself time to reconsider purchases. I try to avoid impulse buying by giving myself time to reconsider purchases. Having savings available provides reassurance during uncertain financial situations. Having savings available provides reassurance during uncertain financial situations. I often compare options before spending money to make sure I get good value. I often compare options before spending money to make sure I get good value. Spending less on unnecessary items allows me to invest in things that matter more. Spending less on unnecessary items allows me to invest in things that matter more. I find that planning ahead helps prevent financial pressure later in the month. I find that planning ahead helps prevent financial pressure later in the month. Being mindful of daily spending habits can significantly improve long-term finances. Being mindful of daily spending habits can significantly improve long-term finances. I feel more confident making financial decisions when I understand where my money goes. I feel more confident making financial decisions when I understand where my money goes. Budgeting effectively requires honesty about spending habits and priorities. Budgeting effectively requires honesty about spending habits and priorities. I prefer quality over quantity when deciding how to spend my money. I prefer quality over quantity when deciding how to spend my money. Small changes in spending behavior can make a noticeable difference over time. Small changes in spending behavior can make a noticeable difference over time. I try to balance enjoying life now with preparing financially for the future. I try to balance enjoying life now with preparing financially for the future. Keeping financial commitments realistic helps avoid unnecessary stress or regret. Keeping financial commitments realistic helps avoid unnecessary stress or regret. I feel more relaxed knowing I have money set aside for emergencies. I feel more relaxed knowing I have money set aside for emergencies. Spending responsibly allows me to enjoy purchases without guilt or anxiety. Spending responsibly allows me to enjoy purchases without guilt or anxiety. I often review my expenses to see where I could make smarter choices. I often review my expenses to see where I could make smarter choices. Developing good money habits takes patience, consistency, and long-term thinking. Developing good money habits takes patience, consistency, and long-term thinking. Planning a journey in advance often reduces stress and helps everything run more smoothly. Planning a journey in advance often reduces stress and helps everything run more smoothly. Catching public transport during busy hours requires patience and a bit of forward thinking. Catching public transport during busy hours requires patience and a bit of forward thinking. I usually allow extra time for travel in case something unexpected delays the journey. I usually allow extra time for travel in case something unexpected delays the journey. Choosing the right mode of transport can completely change how comfortable a trip feels. Choosing the right mode of transport can completely change how comfortable a trip feels. Navigating unfamiliar places becomes easier once you understand the local transport system. Navigating unfamiliar places becomes easier once you understand the local transport system. Traveling longer distances often involves balancing cost, time, and convenience carefully. Traveling longer distances often involves balancing cost, time, and convenience carefully. Missing a connection can be frustrating, especially when the schedule is already tight. Missing a connection can be frustrating, especially when the schedule is already tight. I tend to enjoy journeys more when I am not constantly checking the time. I tend to enjoy journeys more when I am not constantly checking the time. Using maps or navigation apps helps prevent unnecessary detours and confusion. Using maps or navigation apps helps prevent unnecessary detours and confusion. Delays sometimes create opportunities to slow down and observe surroundings more closely. Delays sometimes create opportunities to slow down and observe surroundings more closely. Carrying everything you need makes travelling feel more organised and less stressful. Carrying everything you need makes travelling feel more organised and less stressful. I prefer arriving early rather than rushing and feeling anxious before departure. I prefer arriving early rather than rushing and feeling anxious before departure. Switching between different forms of transport requires awareness and quick decision making. Switching between different forms of transport requires awareness and quick decision making. Long journeys often feel shorter when there is something engaging to focus on. Long journeys often feel shorter when there is something engaging to focus on. Adjusting travel plans at short notice can test patience and flexibility. Adjusting travel plans at short notice can test patience and flexibility. Relying on public transport teaches you to adapt when things do not go as expected. Relying on public transport teaches you to adapt when things do not go as expected. Booking tickets ahead of time usually provides better options and fewer surprises. Booking tickets ahead of time usually provides better options and fewer surprises. Exploring new places becomes more enjoyable once transport worries are handled. Exploring new places becomes more enjoyable once transport worries are handled. I find that travelling light makes moving between locations much easier. I find that travelling light makes moving between locations much easier. Traffic congestion can quickly turn a simple journey into a tiring experience. Traffic congestion can quickly turn a simple journey into a tiring experience. Observing how people travel in different places reveals a lot about daily life. Observing how people travel in different places reveals a lot about daily life. Choosing convenience over speed sometimes leads to a more relaxed journey. Choosing convenience over speed sometimes leads to a more relaxed journey. Unexpected changes to travel plans often require quick thinking and calm reactions. Unexpected changes to travel plans often require quick thinking and calm reactions. Reaching a destination safely always feels more important than arriving quickly. Reaching a destination safely always feels more important than arriving quickly. Reflecting on a journey afterwards often highlights what worked well and what did not. Reflecting on a journey afterwards often highlights what worked well and what did not. Arriving at a party at 7 in the evening always feels easier when at least one familiar face is already there. Arriving at a party at 7 in the evening always feels easier when at least one familiar face is already there. Meeting friends for a coffee on a Saturday morning usually leads to longer conversations than originally planned. Meeting friends for coffee on a Saturday morning usually leads to longer conversations than originally planned. Starting a conversation in a busy cafe feels different from talking quietly in someone's living room. Starting a conversation in a busy cafe feels different from talking quietly in someone's living room. At work events held after 6 o'clock, conversations tend to become more relaxed as the evening goes on. At work events held after 6 o'clock, conversations tend to become more relaxed as the evening goes on. Talking to strangers at a wedding often feels easier once the music starts and everyone loosens up. Talking to strangers at a wedding often feels easier once the music starts and everyone loosens up. During long summer evenings, social gatherings often stretch far beyond the original finishing time. During long summer evenings, social gatherings often stretch far beyond the original finishing time. Meeting someone for the first time at a train station feels rushed compared to sitting together in a restaurant. Meeting someone for the first time at a train station feels rushed compared to sitting together in a restaurant. Conversations at lunchtime tend to be shorter and more focused than those late in the evening. Conversations at lunchtime tend to be shorter and more focused than those late in the evening. Turning up slightly early to a social event can feel awkward, especially if the host is still preparing. Turning up slightly early to a social event can feel awkward, especially if the host is still preparing. Chatting with neighbours outside the house on a sunny afternoon feels more natural than planned meetups. Chatting with neighbours outside the house on a sunny afternoon feels more natural than planned meetups. Social situations on weekday evenings often feel calmer than crowded events on Friday nights. Social situations on weekday evenings often feel calmer than crowded events on Friday nights. Meeting friends in a familiar pub makes conversation flow more easily than in an unfamiliar venue. Meeting friends in a familiar pub makes conversation flow more easily than in an unfamiliar venue. On birthdays and special dates, people tend to talk more openly and emotionally than usual. On birthdays and special dates, people tend to talk more openly and emotionally than usual. Joining a group conversation halfway through can feel challenging without knowing what was already discussed. Joining a group conversation halfway through can feel challenging without knowing what was already discussed. Late night conversations after a long day often become deeper than anything said earlier. Late night conversations after a long day often become deeper than anything said earlier. Talking while walking through a park feels less intense than sitting face to face indoors. Talking while walking through a park feels less intense than sitting face to face indoors. Social plans made weeks in advance sometimes feel less exciting than spontaneous invitations. Social plans made weeks in advance sometimes feel less exciting than spontaneous invitations. Catching up with someone after months apart often leads to conversations lasting well past midnight. Catching up with someone after months apart often leads to conversations lasting well past midnight. Group chats during holidays usually stay active from early morning until late at night. Group chats during holidays usually stay active from early morning until late at night. Meeting people in new cities often changes how confident social interactions feel. Meeting people in new cities often changes how confident social interactions feel. Conversations at family gatherings tend to repeat topics depending on who arrives and when. Conversations at family gatherings tend to repeat topics depending on who arrives and when. Social events held outdoors usually feel more relaxed than formal indoor occasions. Social events held outdoors usually feel more relaxed than formal indoor occasions. Talking to colleagues outside the workplace can completely change the tone of the relationship. Talking to colleagues outside the workplace can completely change the tone of the relationship. Ending a social evening around 10 o'clock feels early, even if everyone is already tired. Ending a social evening around 10 o'clock feels early, even if everyone is already tired. Looking back on social moments later often makes ordinary conversations feel more meaningful. Looking back on social moments later often makes ordinary conversations feel more meaningful. Studying early in the morning often feels more productive before messages and notifications start appearing. Studying early in the morning often feels more productive before messages and notifications start appearing. Learning something new in a quiet library feels very different from studying at home in the evening. Learning something new in a quiet library feels very different from studying at home in the evening. Revising notes late at night can feel harder than expected, especially after a long day. Revising notes late at night can feel harder than expected, especially after a long day. Studying for an exam on a Sunday afternoon usually requires more discipline than weekday sessions. Studying for an exam on a Sunday afternoon usually requires more discipline than weekday sessions. Learning vocabulary while commuting often helps turn wasted travel time into something useful. Learning vocabulary while commuting often helps turn wasted travel time into something useful. Studying in short sessions throughout the week feels more effective than cramming everything at once. Studying in short sessions throughout the week feels more effective than cramming everything at once. Watching explanations in the evening sometimes helps ideas make sense overnight. Watching explanations in the evening sometimes helps ideas make sense overnight. Learning in a classroom setting feels more structured than studying alone at home. Learning in a classroom setting feels more structured than studying alone at home. Reviewing material just before bedtime often makes it easier to remember the next day. Reviewing material just before bedtime often makes it easier to remember the next day. Studying with background noise in a cafe can feel motivating rather than distracting. Studying with background noise in a cafe can feel motivating rather than distracting. Connecting new information to everyday experiences often makes learning feel more practical and memorable. Connecting new information to everyday experiences often makes learning feel more practical and memorable. Over several days, revisiting the same topic gradually builds confidence and deeper understanding. Over several days, revisiting the same topic gradually builds confidence and deeper understanding. Early in the week, study sessions usually feel calmer than those rushed into the weekend. Early in the week, study sessions usually feel calmer than those rushed into the weekend. Making mistakes during practice can quietly improve understanding without much conscious effort. Making mistakes during practice can quietly improve understanding without much conscious effort. Short breaks between study sessions help prevent mental fatigue from building too quickly. Short breaks between study sessions help prevent mental fatigue from building too quickly. Studying somewhere unfamiliar can sometimes sharpen focus by breaking usual habits and routines. Studying somewhere unfamiliar can sometimes sharpen focus by breaking usual habits and routines. After lunch, staying focused often requires extra effort, especially during longer study sessions. After lunch, staying focused often requires extra effort, especially during longer study sessions. At the end of each week, reviewing progress helps identify what still needs improvement. At the end of each week, reviewing progress helps identify what still needs improvement. Learning becomes far more enjoyable once progress starts to feel visible and motivating. Learning becomes far more enjoyable once progress starts to feel visible and motivating. Having a clear study goal makes each session feel more purposeful and rewarding. Having a clear study goal makes each session feel more purposeful and rewarding. Setting a regular study time each day helps turn learning into a steady habit. Setting a regular study time each day helps turn learning into a steady habit. Saying ideas aloud while revising can improve confidence before speaking or presenting. Saying ideas aloud while revising can improve confidence before speaking or presenting. Quiet evenings often create better conditions for deep concentration than busy daytime hours. Quiet evenings often create better conditions for deep concentration than busy daytime hours. Spreading learning over time usually feels less stressful than leaving everything until the last minute. Spreading learning over time usually feels less stressful than leaving everything until the last minute. Looking back on earlier study efforts often reveals more progress than originally expected. Looking back on earlier study efforts often reveals more progress than originally expected. I've realised over time that sleep quality affects my mood more than how long I stay in bed. I've realised over time that sleep quality affects my mood more than how long I stay in bed. On busy weekdays, even a short walk outside can noticeably improve how the body feels. On busy weekdays, even a short walk outside can noticeably improve how the body feels. I'm becoming more aware of how stress shows up physically before it becomes overwhelming. I'm becoming more aware of how stress shows up physically before it becomes overwhelming. Paying attention to early signs of tiredness often helps prevent burnout later on. Paying attention to early signs of tiredness often helps prevent burnout later on. I've noticed that drinking water regularly improves concentration throughout the afternoon. I've noticed that drinking water regularly improves concentration throughout the afternoon. After long hours of sitting, gentle movement usually helps release built-up tension. After long hours of sitting, gentle movement usually helps release built-up tension. I'm trying to slow down my breathing whenever my thoughts start racing unnecessarily. I'm trying to slow down my breathing whenever my thoughts start racing unnecessarily. Eating regular meals during the day tends to keep energy levels more stable. Eating regular meals during the day tends to keep energy levels more stable. I've learned that pushing through exhaustion often leads to feeling worse the next day. I've learned that pushing through exhaustion often leads to feeling worse the next day. Taking short breaks during work hours helps both mental focus and physical comfort. Taking short breaks during work hours helps both mental focus and physical comfort. I'm starting to understand that well-being includes emotional balance, not just physical health. I'm starting to understand that well-being includes emotional balance, not just physical health. Spending time outdoors often improves mood, even when the weather is not ideal. Spending time outdoors often improves mood, even when the weather is not ideal. I found that consistent routines make healthy habits easier to maintain. I found that consistent routines make healthy habits easier to maintain. Listening to the body's signals usually leads to better decisions around rest and activity. Listening to the body's signals usually leads to better decisions around rest and activity. I'm more careful now about ignoring stress, especially when it builds quietly. I'm more careful now about ignoring stress, especially when it builds quietly. Getting enough rest becomes more important during periods of long-term pressure. Getting enough rest becomes more important during periods of long-term pressure. I've noticed that my patience improves when I allow myself proper recovery time. I've noticed that my patience improves when I allow myself proper recovery time. Small lifestyle adjustments often create bigger health benefits than drastic changes. Small lifestyle adjustments often create bigger health benefits than drastic changes. I'm learning to recognize when slowing down is more helpful than pushing forward. I'm learning to recognize when slowing down is more helpful than pushing forward. Feeling supported socially can positively influence both mental and physical well-being. Feeling supported socially can positively influence both mental and physical well-being. I've realized that late nights affect my energy more than I expect. I've realized that late nights affect my energy more than I expect. Creating a calm evening routine often leads to better sleep quality. Creating a calm evening routine often leads to better sleep quality. I'm becoming more mindful of how daily habits influence long-term health. I'm becoming more mindful of how daily habits influence long-term health. Over time, caring for well-being starts to feel like a regular practice rather than a task. Over time, caring for well-being starts to feel like a regular practice rather than a task. I've come to accept that maintaining health is an ongoing process, not a fixed destination. I've come to accept that maintaining health is an ongoing process, not a fixed destination.
Checking emails repeatedly throughout the day can quietly interrupt concentration without being obvious. Checking emails repeatedly throughout the day can quietly interrupt concentration without being obvious. I'm trying to limit screen time in the evenings so my mind can slow down naturally. I'm trying to limit screen time in the evenings so my mind can slow down naturally. Relying on digital calendars helps organize life, but it can reduce flexibility. Relying on digital calendars helps organize life, but it can reduce flexibility. Scrolling endlessly through short videos often makes time disappear faster than expected. Scrolling endlessly through short videos often makes time disappear faster than expected. Online communication allows quick responses, yet it sometimes lacks emotional depth. Online communication allows quick responses, yet it sometimes lacks emotional depth. I've begun separating work-related apps from personal ones to reduce constant distractions. I've begun separating work-related apps from personal ones to reduce constant distractions. Using navigation apps has changed how people explore unfamiliar cities. Using navigation apps has changed how people explore unfamiliar cities. Spending long hours online can blur the boundary between work and rest. Spending long hours online can blur the boundary between work and rest. Digital notifications frequently compete for attention, even during quiet moments. Digital notifications frequently compete for attention, even during quiet moments. I'm becoming more intentional about which online platforms deserve daily attention. I'm becoming more intentional about which online platforms deserve daily attention. Streaming content late at night can interfere with sleep patterns over time. Streaming content late at night can interfere with sleep patterns over time. Technology enables instant access to information, but it can also overwhelm decision making. Technology enables instant access to information, but it can also overwhelm decision making. I avoid checking my phone during conversations because it changes the quality of interaction. I avoid checking my phone during conversations because it changes the quality of interaction. Online shopping saves time, yet it sometimes encourages unnecessary spending. Online shopping saves time, yet it sometimes encourages unnecessary spending. Taking regular breaks from screens helps restore focus and mental clarity. Taking regular breaks from screens helps restore focus and mental clarity. I now leave my phone in another room when I need deep concentration. I now leave my phone in another room when I need deep concentration. Digital habits often develop gradually without much conscious awareness. Digital habits often develop gradually without much conscious awareness. Constant internet access has reshaped expectations around availability and response times. Constant internet access has reshaped expectations around availability and response times. I reduce screen brightness in the evening to help my body prepare for rest. I reduce screen brightness in the evening to help my body prepare for rest. Depending heavily on technology can make simple tasks feel more complicated than needed. Depending heavily on technology can make simple tasks feel more complicated than needed. Online tools simplify many tasks, but they can also increase daily mental load. Online tools simplify many tasks, but they can also increase daily mental load. I deliberately mute certain apps to regain control over my attention. I deliberately mute certain apps to regain control over my attention. Spending less time online creates space for reflection and uninterrupted thinking. Spending less time online creates space for reflection and uninterrupted thinking. Technology fits best into daily life when it supports routines rather than controls them. Technology fits best into daily life when it supports routines rather than controls them. Learning to manage digital habits feels essential in a world that never fully switches off. Learning to manage digital habits feels essential in a world that never fully switches off. Browsing through a shop without a clear plan often leads to buying things that were never intended. Browsing through a shop without a clear plan often leads to buying things that were never intended. I usually compare prices carefully before committing to a service that involves ongoing payments. I usually compare prices carefully before committing to a service that involves ongoing payments. Standing in a long queue can quickly test patience, especially during busy shopping periods. Standing in a long queue can quickly test patience, especially during busy shopping periods. Returning an item feels awkward sometimes, even when there is a valid reason. Returning an item feels awkward sometimes, even when there is a valid reason. Good customer service can completely change how a purchase is remembered later. Good customer service can completely change how a purchase is remembered later. I tend to ask questions before paying, particularly when terms or conditions seem unclear. I tend to ask questions before paying, particularly when terms or conditions seem unclear. Shopping online late at night often results in impulse decisions the next morning regrets. Shopping online late at night often results in impulse decisions the next morning regrets. Clear pricing helps customers feel more confident about spending their money. Clear pricing helps customers feel more confident about spending their money. Booking services in advance usually provides more options and fewer complications. Booking services in advance usually provides more options and fewer complications. Dealing with poor service requires calm communication to avoid unnecessary frustration. Dealing with poor service requires calm communication to avoid unnecessary frustration. I often keep receipts in case something needs to be exchanged or refunded. I often keep receipts in case something needs to be exchanged or refunded. Choosing between similar products becomes easier once priorities are clearly defined. Choosing between similar products becomes easier once priorities are clearly defined. Unexpected charges can quickly damage trust between customers and service providers. Unexpected charges can quickly damage trust between customers and service providers. Paying attention to reviews helps form realistic expectations before making a decision. Paying attention to reviews helps form realistic expectations before making a decision. I prefer dealing with businesses that communicate openly and honestly. I prefer dealing with businesses that communicate openly and honestly. Comparing quality rather than price alone often leads to better long-term satisfaction. Comparing quality rather than price alone often leads to better long-term satisfaction. Asking for clarification politely can prevent misunderstandings during transactions. Asking for clarification politely can prevent misunderstandings during transactions. Waiting for a service appointment sometimes feels longer than the service itself. Waiting for a service appointment sometimes feels longer than the service itself. I avoid rushing purchases when I feel pressured by time or sales tactics. I avoid rushing purchases when I feel pressured by time or sales tactics. Reliable services are usually appreciated most when something goes wrong. Reliable services are usually appreciated most when something goes wrong. Checking return policies beforehand can save frustration later. Checking return policies beforehand can save frustration later. I feel more confident shopping when policies are explained clearly. I feel more confident shopping when policies are explained clearly. Handling complaints calmly increases the chance of a positive outcome. Handling complaints calmly increases the chance of a positive outcome. Spending money feels more satisfying when the experience matches expectations. Spending money feels more satisfying when the experience matches expectations. Over time, experiences with services influence where people choose to shop again. Over time, experiences with services influence where people choose to shop again. I've learned that coordinating meetings across different time zones requires patience and realistic expectations. I've learned that coordinating meetings across different time zones requires patience and realistic expectations. Arriving at the station early usually gives me enough time to deal with unexpected delays. Arriving at the station early usually gives me enough time to deal with unexpected delays. I'm often adjusting my schedule when appointments change at short notice during busy weeks. I'm often adjusting my schedule when appointments change at short notice during busy weeks. Blocking time in my calendar has helped protect focus from constant interruptions. Blocking time in my calendar has helped protect focus from constant interruptions. I've noticed that missing one deadline can affect several people, not just me. I've noticed that missing one deadline can affect several people, not just me. Scheduling errands back to back in the city centre sometimes saves time but drains energy quickly. Scheduling errands back to back in the city centre sometimes saves time but drains energy quickly. I'm trying to leave quiet hours in the evening for tasks that need proper attention. I'm trying to leave quiet hours in the evening for tasks that need proper attention. Delays at airports have taught me to leave generous gaps between connections. Delays at airports have taught me to leave generous gaps between connections. I've spent many mornings juggling family commitments alongside work meetings. I've spent many mornings juggling family commitments alongside work meetings. Setting realistic time estimates usually prevents frustration when tasks take longer than expected. Setting realistic time estimates usually prevents frustration when tasks take longer than expected. I'm guilty of postponing decisions, even when it compresses my schedule later. I'm guilty of postponing decisions, even when it compresses my schedule later. Reserving time for rest during the week helps avoid relying entirely on weekends. Reserving time for rest during the week helps avoid relying entirely on weekends. I've synced my digital calendars to reduce confusion about dates and locations. I've synced my digital calendars to reduce confusion about dates and locations. Running late for an appointment often affects my mood for the rest of the day. Running late for an appointment often affects my mood for the rest of the day. I'll usually spread tasks across several days instead of cramming everything into one afternoon. I'll usually spread tasks across several days instead of cramming everything into one afternoon. Coordinating schedules in shared households requires compromise and frequent reminders. Coordinating schedules in shared households requires compromise and frequent reminders. I've learned to allow travel time between locations to avoid rushed transitions. I've learned to allow travel time between locations to avoid rushed transitions. Reviewing commitments at the start of the week makes planning feel more manageable. Reviewing commitments at the start of the week makes planning feel more manageable. I'm constantly adjusting plans when unexpected events interrupt carefully arranged schedules. I'm constantly adjusting plans when unexpected events interrupt carefully arranged schedules. Booking time slots early increases the chance of securing preferred dates and venues. Booking time slots early increases the chance of securing preferred dates and venues. I've lost track of time before while working deeply, which disrupted later plans. I've lost track of time before while working deeply, which disrupted later plans. Planning errands around peak hours helps avoid crowds and unnecessary waiting. Planning errands around peak hours helps avoid crowds and unnecessary waiting. I'll always confirm times and places in advance to prevent misunderstandings. I'll always confirm times and places in advance to prevent misunderstandings. Managing time effectively gives me space for both productivity and proper recovery. Managing time effectively gives me space for both productivity and proper recovery. I've realised that looking ahead at long-term schedules makes daily planning feel more purposeful. I've realised that looking ahead at long-term schedules makes daily planning feel more purposeful. I've noticed that everyday conversations often feel easier once people stop trying to sound impressive. I've noticed that everyday conversations often feel easier once people stop trying to sound impressive. Chatting briefly with someone in a queue can make waiting feel shorter and more relaxed. Chatting briefly with someone in a queue can make waiting feel shorter and more relaxed. I'm usually more comfortable talking when the conversation flows naturally without forced topics. I'm usually more comfortable talking when the conversation flows naturally without forced topics. Small comments about the weather or the day often open the door to longer conversations. Small comments about the weather or the day often open the door to longer conversations. I've had many meaningful conversations start unexpectedly in ordinary places like shops or cafes. I've had many meaningful conversations start unexpectedly in ordinary places like shops or cafes. Talking while walking somewhere together often feels less intense than sitting face to face. Talking while walking somewhere together often feels less intense than sitting face to face. I'm learning that listening properly matters more than having something clever to say. I'm learning that listening properly matters more than having something clever to say. Everyday conversations tend to feel more natural when people speak at a relaxed pace. Everyday conversations tend to feel more natural when people speak at a relaxed pace. I found that asking simple follow-up questions keeps conversations moving smoothly. I found that asking simple follow-up questions keeps conversations moving smoothly. Casual conversations at the end of the day often feel more honest than earlier ones. Casual conversations at the end of the day often feel more honest than earlier ones. I'm more likely to enjoy a conversation when there is no pressure to agree. I'm more likely to enjoy a conversation when there is no pressure to agree. Short exchanges during busy moments can still feel friendly and human. Short exchanges during busy moments can still feel friendly and human. I've noticed that tone and timing affect conversations more than the exact words used. I've noticed that tone and timing affect conversations more than the exact words used. Talking about shared experiences usually creates an instant sense of connection. Talking about shared experiences usually creates an instant sense of connection. I'm becoming more aware of how silence can feel comfortable rather than awkward. I'm becoming more aware of how silence can feel comfortable rather than awkward. Everyday conversations often improve when people feel heard instead of interrupted. Everyday conversations often improve when people feel heard instead of interrupted. I've had quick chats turn into long discussions simply because both people felt relaxed. I've had quick chats turn into long discussions simply because both people felt relaxed. Conversations in familiar places tend to feel easier than those in unfamiliar settings. Conversations in familiar places tend to feel easier than those in unfamiliar settings. I'm more confident speaking when I stop worrying about making small mistakes. I'm more confident speaking when I stop worrying about making small mistakes. Simple conversations during routine moments often become the most memorable. Simple conversations during routine moments often become the most memorable. I've realized that everyday language sounds better when it feels genuine rather than perfect. I've realized that everyday language sounds better when it feels genuine rather than perfect. Talking regularly with different people helps build confidence without conscious effort. Talking regularly with different people helps build confidence without conscious effort. I'm learning to end conversations politely without feeling the need to explain too much. I'm learning to end conversations politely without feeling the need to explain too much. Everyday conversations feel most enjoyable when there is mutual interest and respect. Everyday conversations feel most enjoyable when there is mutual interest and respect. I've come to understand that fluency grows naturally through regular, real conversations. I've come to understand that fluency grows naturally through regular, real conversations.